March 15, 2024. The Grind Gym, downtown Los Angeles. Marcus Sullivan had been training washed-up actors for 12 years. That morning, a kid half his age walked in claiming he wanted to spar. Vincent Cray, 28 years old, perfect form, dead eyes. Marcus should have recognized those eyes. Should have remembered whose son carried that particular brand of rage. Instead, he stepped into the ring. The footage lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Marcus, gray-haired and supposedly past his prime, systematically dismantling a fighter young enough to be his son. No mercy, no restraint, pure violence. 12 million views in 6 hours. Career over by sunset. What the cameras didn't show was Vincent whispering 4 words before the bell rang. "My father says hello." 15 years Marcus had buried that secret. 15 years he thought he was safe. He wasn't. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus stared at his phone screen, watching the view count climb. 12.3 million now. The comments section had become a feeding frenzy of keyboard warriors calling for his head. Violence against young athletes. Toxic masculinity run wild. Someone should lock this psycho up. His hands didn't shake as he set the phone face down on the desk. They should have. Any normal man watching his life implode in real time would be trembling. But Marcus Sullivan hadn't been normal for 15 years. Not since Danny Cray's body hit the concrete 3 stories below the Millennium Tower stunt rig. The gym's front door chimed. Marcus looked up from his cluttered office to see Jerry Kowalski shuffling through the entrance, designer sneakers squeaking against the worn rubber flooring. Jerry moved like a man carrying invisible weights, the burden of 3 failed comebacks and a cocaine scandal that had turned him from A-list leading man to cautionary tale. "You seen it?" Jerry's voice cracked like old leather. "Hard to miss." Marcus stood, his lower back protesting. The sparring session with Vincent had been 6 hours ago, but his body was cataloging every impact. At 58, recovery wasn't what it used to be. Jerry held up his phone, the video frozen on Marcus's face mid-swing. Even in the grainy footage, you could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the muscle memory of a man who'd choreographed violence for 2 decades before transitioning to this second-rate gym. "They're saying you snapped, that you beat the hell out of some kid for no reason. That's what it looks like, but that's not what happened." Marcus moved to the window overlooking 7th Street. Below, LA moved with its usual indifferent rhythm. Homeless camps beside food trucks, luxury cars stuck in traffic next to beat-up Honda Civics. The city that had made him, then broken him, then ignored him. What does it matter? The internet's already decided. Jerry stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because I know you, Steele. I've been training here for 3 years. You've never thrown a punch in anger. Hell, you barely raise your voice when someone's doing a drill wrong." The nickname hit harder than it should have. Steele Sullivan, Hollywood's most feared stunt coordinator. The man who could make any actor look like an action hero, who could design a fight sequence that left audiences breathless while keeping performers safe. That man died with Danny Cray. What walked around in his body now was just Marcus, owner of a failing gym where has-beens came to pretend they still mattered. "Kid said something that set me off," Marcus lied. Simple as that. But it wasn't simple. Nothing about Vincent Cray was simple. The boy, man now, Marcus had to remind himself, looked exactly like his father at that age. Same dark hair, same lean build, same way of moving like a coiled spring. But Danny's eyes had held warmth, even when he was focused. Vincent's were winter. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. V." Jesus. Jerry was scrolling through something on his phone. TMZ picked it up. "They're calling you Hollywood's most dangerous trainer. Someone leaked your old credentials, the Bond work, the Fast and Furious gigs, all the big action sequences you coordinated." Of course they had. Vincent had planned this down to the last detail. 15 years to prepare, to build his case, to position all the pieces. Marcus had to admire the patience, even as it destroyed him. "There's more." Jerry's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're digging into your past. Found some old articles about that stuntman who died during the Millennium Tower sequence. Danny something. Danny Cray." "Right. They're connecting dots, Steele. Saying maybe you've always been violent, that maybe what happened back then wasn't an accident. Marcus's reflection stared back at him from the window. Gray stubble, lines carved deep by guilt and sleepless nights, eyes that had seen too much. The official report had been clear: equipment failure, tragic accident, no one at fault. But reports could be doctored, witnesses could be bought, and the truth could be buried under enough paperwork and studio liability concerns. Vincent knew that. Somehow that kid knew everything. "I should go," Jerry said, pocketing his phone. "My agent's already fielding calls. The network's reassessing my comeback series. Being associated with you right now." He trailed off, but the message was clear. Marcus nodded. "I understand." After Jerry left, Marcus stood alone in his gym, surrounded by punching bags and weight machines and mirrors that reflected nothing but empty space. Outside, the sun was setting behind the downtown skyline, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number: Millennium Tower, roof access, midnight. Come alone, or the real footage goes public. Marcus stared at the message until the screen went dark. 15 years ago, Danny Cray had fallen from that roof. Tonight, Vincent wanted to meet at the same spot. Some conversations, Marcus realized, could only happen where they started. Marcus locked the gym's front door and turned the deadbolt, the metallic click echoing through the empty space. The sound felt final somehow, like sealing a tomb. He'd built this place from nothing, scraped together insurance money and what little savings Hollywood had left him to create something honest. No stunts, no illusions, just iron and sweat and the possibility of redemption through simple, brutal work. Now it felt like a mausoleum for a life that was already dead. He moved through the familiar darkness, muscle memory guiding him past the heavy bags and weight racks. The air still held the sharp tang of disinfectant and old leather, mixed with that particular smell of exertion that never quite left a place where people came to push their limits. Home. This had become home in a way his sterile apartment never was. The office door stood ajar, spilling weak fluorescent light across the gym floor. Inside, Marcus pulled a bottle of Jameson from the bottom desk drawer. Not his first choice for dinner, but food seemed impossible right now. His stomach was a knot of acid and anticipation. The whiskey burned, but it was honest pain, not the phantom ache that had lived in his chest for 15 years. On his desk, beside the silent phone, sat a framed photograph he rarely looked at anymore. The rap party for Velocity, the action thriller that was supposed to be his masterpiece. Danny Cray stood beside him, both of them grinning like idiots, arms around each other's shoulders. Danny couldn't have been more than 25 then, all enthusiasm and raw talent, believing Marcus could teach him anything. Marcus traced the glass with one finger. Danny's smile was radiant, the kind of pure joy that came from loving your work so much it didn't feel like work at all. 3 days after this photo was taken, Danny would be dead, and Marcus would learn that some lessons couldn't be taught, only lived through if you survived them. The kid had called him Uncle Steele sometimes, when they were between takes and the formality dropped away. Danny's parents were gone, car accident when he was 16, and Marcus had found himself filling a role he'd never expected to want, teaching him not just the technical aspects of stunt work, but the philosophy behind it, how to make violence beautiful, how to tell a story with your body, how to cheat death for the cameras while respecting its power. He'd failed at all of it. Marcus set the photo face down and pulled out his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing Vincent Cray into the search bar. The results were sparse, a few social media profiles set to private, some mentions in industry newsletters, a picture from a martial arts tournament 3 years ago, Vincent accepting a trophy, his expression serious even in victory. No smile, no celebration, just cold satisfaction. But it was the background that caught Marcus's attention, a banner partially visible behind the podium Cray Foundation for Stunt Safety. Danny's name in smaller text below. Vincent hadn't just spent 15 years planning revenge. He'd built a monument to his father's memory while doing it. The irony was a blade between Marcus's ribs. Everything Vincent stood for, everything the foundation represented, Marcus believed in too. He'd spent years after Danny's death advocating for better safety protocols, pushing for industry changes that studios didn't want to pay for. He'd testified before insurance boards, consulted on new safety standards, all while carrying the weight of knowing that if he'd been better, more careful, more aware, Danny would still be alive to benefit from those changes. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena Vasquez, his only remaining client who wasn't a washed-up actor desperate for relevance. Elena ran a nonprofit for at-risk kids, using boxing and martial arts to give them structure and purpose. She'd hired Marcus to train her staff, not for Hollywood glory but for the simple ability to protect the children in their care. Saw the news. Whatever really happened, I know who you are. Don't let them make you forget. Marcus stared at the message until his vision blurred. Elena had good instincts. She'd have to, working with kids who'd seen every kind of betrayal and violence the world could offer. If she still believed in him, maybe he wasn't as lost as he felt. But belief wouldn't protect her nonprofit when the scandal spread. Wouldn't protect the kids who needed what she was building. Another life his past would destroy. Another good thing that would crumble because Marcus Sullivan had touched it. Outside, the city hummed with its restless energy. Sirens in the distance, the rumble of late buses, the occasional shout from the street. Los Angeles after dark, beautiful and predatory, full of dreams that turned to ash the moment you held them too tightly. Marcus checked the time, 9:47 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes until he faced Vincent Cray on the roof where it all began. 2 hours to decide whether he was walking into an execution or something else entirely. He poured another whiskey and watched the amber liquid catch the fluorescent light, holding secrets in its depths like everything else in this city of mirrors and shadows. The phone rang. Marcus stared at it, watching the unknown number flash on the cracked screen. In the 15 years since Danny's death, he'd learned to read the weight of incoming calls. Desperate actors usually texted, bill collectors called during business hours, and telemarketers had a particular persistence. This felt different, heavy, like gravity had shifted around the small device. He let it ring 4 times before answering. Steele Sullivan. The voice on the other end was gravelly, weathered by decades of cigarettes and California smog. Marcus hadn't heard it in 15 years, but recognition hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Frank Delacroix. Marcus's whiskey glass stopped halfway to his lips. Thought you were dead. Not yet. Though some days I wish I was. Frank's laugh turned into a cough. Saw your little performance on the internet tonight, brought back memories. Frank Delacroix, the line producer who'd overseen the Velocity production, the man who'd signed off on every safety protocol, every piece of equipment, every insurance waiver, the man who'd disappeared 3 days after Danny's funeral, vanishing from Hollywood like smoke. What do you want, Frank? Same thing you want, I imagine. The truth. Marcus could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of waves. Frank was calling from somewhere near the coast. Tell me, Steele, when that boy showed up at your gym today, did he seem surprised? Or did he look like a man who'd found exactly what he was looking for? Marcus's throat went dry. How do you know about Vincent? Because I've been watching him watch you for 3 years. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus set down his whiskey with trembling fingers, his mind reeling. 3 years. Vincent hadn't just planned today's encounter. He'd been studying Marcus, learning his patterns, his weaknesses, his routines, all while Frank Delacroix observed from the shadows like some broken guardian angel. Why now? Marcus's voice came out rough. Why are you calling now? Because tomorrow morning, Vincent's going to release security footage from the Millennium Tower set. Real footage, not the sanitized version the studio buried. Frank's breathing was labored, like a man who'd been running for 15 years and finally stopped. Footage that shows exactly what happened on that roof. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. That's impossible. The cameras were destroyed in the fall. One camera was destroyed. The backup digital recorder was misplaced during the investigation. Amazing how evidence disappears when studios have enough money and enough lawyers. Frank paused. But digital files have a way of surviving, Steele, especially when someone knows where to look. Outside Marcus's window, Los Angeles continued its endless dance of light and shadow. But the city felt different now, like a stage set that had suddenly revealed its painted backdrops and hidden machinery. Everything. Vincent's arrival, the perfectly timed sparring session, the viral video, had been orchestrated. But by whom? "Vincent doesn't want revenge," Frank continued. "He wants justice. There's a difference, though I'm not sure it matters to the man who killed his father." "Equipment failure," Marcus said automatically. The harness snapped. "I checked it myself." "You checked the harness someone wanted you to check." Frank's voice carried the weight of 15 years' worth of secrets. "The question is, who switched it out? Who wanted Danny Cray dead badly enough to frame Hollywood's most respected stunt coordinator for criminal negligence?" Marcus's mind raced back to that night. The chaos after Danny's fall, the investigators swarming the set, the studio executives in their expensive suits forming a protective wall around their investment. He remembered his own confusion, the sick certainty that he'd somehow failed, that his careful planning had missed some crucial detail. But if Frank was telling the truth, the failure hadn't been Marcus's. It had been deliberate. "The roof meeting," Marcus said. "Vincent's expecting me at midnight." "He's expecting both of us." Frank's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because whoever killed Danny figured out we've been getting too close to the truth. They're done hiding, Steele. After 15 years in the shadows, they're ready to finish what they started." The line went dead. Marcus sat in the fluorescent-lit office, surrounded by the detritus of his second-chance life, and felt the last pieces of his carefully constructed reality crumble away. The guilt he'd carried like a stone in his chest, the certainty that his negligence had killed the closest thing to a son he'd ever had, all of it built on lies. But lies told by whom? And why? He looked at the overturned photograph on his desk, Danny's hidden smile pressed against the wood. Tomorrow the world would see what really happened on that roof. Tonight, Marcus would learn whether he was a victim or whether he'd been complicit all along. Either way, the man who'd spent 15 years hiding in this gym was about to die. What emerged from the Millennium Tower tonight would be something else entirely. Marcus stared at the dead phone for a full minute, Frank's words echoing in the empty office like gunshots. 15 years in the shadows. The implications crawled under his skin like living things, making him itch with paranoia he couldn't scratch away. He stood abruptly, the desk chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a dull thud. Movement felt necessary. Sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting the possibility that everything he'd believed about himself, about Danny's death, about his own culpability, was a carefully constructed lie. The gym felt different as he walked through it. No longer a sanctuary, but a cage. Every shadow could hide watching eyes. Every creak of the old building's bones could mask approaching footsteps. Marcus found himself checking the locks on the front door twice, testing the deadbolts with the paranoid precision of a man who just learned he had enemies he couldn't name. His phone buzzed. Another text. "Frank talks too much. Always did. V." The message had arrived 30 seconds after Frank's call ended. Vincent was listening, or watching, or both. Marcus deleted the text and immediately regretted it. Evidence vanishing with a swipe of his thumb, just like everything else connected to Danny's death. He was already thinking like a guilty man, covering tracks before he understood what trail he might be leaving. The bottle of Jameson called to him from the office, but alcohol felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Not tonight. Whatever was waiting on that roof required clarity, even if clarity meant facing truths that would destroy what little peace he'd managed to build. Instead, he moved to the back room where he kept his personal equipment. Most of his Hollywood gear had been sold or donated years ago, but some habits died hard. The tactical knife was still sharp, its weight familiar in his palm. The compact flashlight still held a charge. Old tools for an older version of himself, when Marcus Sullivan had been someone worth protecting. He was sliding the knife into his boot when his phone rang again. Elena? Her name escaped before he could stop it, surprise and worry warring in his voice. "Marcus, thank God." Elena's voice was tight with fear. "Someone broke into the center tonight. Nothing was stolen, but they went through my office. All the files about our training program, about you. Everything's been photographed." Marcus's blood turned to slush. Elena's nonprofit worked with kids who'd aged out of foster care, teenagers who'd seen every kind of violence the system could inflict. If Vincent, or whoever was really pulling these strings, dragged those children into this war. Are you safe? Are the kids? Everyone's fine. But Marcus, there's something else. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. One of the older boys, Carlos, was here late working on his college applications. He saw someone leaving through the back exit. The description... She paused. It wasn't Vincent. What do you mean? Older man, well-dressed. Carlos said he moved like military, like the MPs at his uncle's base. And when the man saw Carlos, he smiled. Elena's breathing quickened. Carlos has been through hell, Marcus. It takes a lot to scare that kid. But whatever he saw in that smile, the line crackled with static, and Marcus heard Elena gasp. Elena? Elena, are you there? Sorry, I thought. Someone's in the parking lot. Her voice became distant, like she'd moved away from the phone. Black sedan, engine running. They're just sitting there. Get inside. Lock the doors. Call the police. The police won't. The line went dead. Marcus was moving before conscious thought took over, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. Elena's nonprofit was 20 minutes away in traffic, 15 if he ignored speed limits and traffic lights. His ancient Toyota truck started on the second try, the engine coughing to life like an old man waking from uneasy dreams. The streets blurred past, strip malls and liquor stores, bus stops where the city's forgotten waited for transportation that might never come. Marcus had driven these routes countless times over the past 15 years, but tonight they felt like hostile territory. Every intersection was a potential ambush, every mirror reflection a possible tale. His phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Text message from Elena's number, false alarm. Just a rideshare driver, don't come, E. Marcus read it twice while stopped at a red light. Elena never abbreviated her name in texts, ever. It was a quirk he'd noticed early in their professional relationship. She signed everything with her full name, like she was claiming space in a world that had tried to make her invisible. The light turned green. Marcus drove toward Elena's neighborhood anyway, the knife in his boot a small comfort against the certainty that he was already too late. Behind him, a black sedan maintained perfect following distance, close enough to track his movements, far enough back to seem coincidental. Vincent wasn't just orchestrating Marcus's downfall. He was dismantling every connection, every relationship, every fragment of the life Marcus had built after Hollywood. And somewhere in the darkness, the real killer watched and waited, ready to finish what had started on a rooftop 15 years ago. The clock on Marcus's dashboard read 11:23 p.m., 37 minutes until midnight. Time enough to save Elena, if she could still be saved. Time enough to finally learn who wanted Marcus Sullivan dead and why Danny Cray had died for that secret.